The hum of motorcycles echoed through the still evening air, a low rumble that hinted at trouble before it arrived. At a small suburban gas station on the outskirts of town, Michael, a hard-working black mechanic, had just finished helping an elderly woman change a flat tire. His hands, stained with grease and effort, moved with practiced ease as he tightened the last lug nut. The woman, her face glowing with gratitude, waved goodbye as she drove off, her crisis resolved by his act of kindness. Michael turned back to his motorcycle, ready to head home after a long day. He enjoyed his work and took pride in lending a helping hand. But now, all he wanted was the comfort of his small apartment and the quiet solace of an evening to himself. Yet, as he reached for his helmet, the distant roar of engines grew louder, a warning that peace was about to shatter. 3 motorcycles roared into the gas station, their riders clad in leather jackets adorned with intimidating patches. The trio dismounted with an air of arrogance, their boots crunching against the gravel as they walked toward Michael. The leader, a tall man with a red bandana tied tightly around his head, smirked as his eyes settled on Michael. Well, the man sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. What's a guy like you doing around here? Don't you know this isn't your kind of place? Michael didn't flinch. He'd faced moments like this before, moments where prejudice disguised itself as bravado, where hostility was worn like armor. He met the leader's gaze evenly, his calm demeanor masking the frustration that simmered beneath the surface. Just filling up, Michael replied, his voice steady but firm. He had no intention of letting their taunts rattle him, but he also knew better than to turn his back on them. The bikers laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the gas station walls. They spread out around him, their movements calculated, predatory. One of them, shorter but muscular, leaned in closer, his lips curling into a sneer. You must have made a wrong turn, buddy. This isn't your neighborhood, he said, his tone as sharp as the chain he casually swung from one hand to the other. Michael said nothing. He simply adjusted his grip on his helmet, his knuckles tightening. He had no interest in escalating the situation, but he wasn't about to show fear either. Fear was what they thrived on, and he wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The leader stepped closer, his smirk growing darker. You might want to check that attitude before we give you a reason to regret stopping here, he said, his voice low and menacing. His companions chuckled, their laughter devoid of humor. Michael felt the weight of their stares, the hostility radiating from them like heat from a fire. The gas station, once a quiet pit stop, had become the stage for a confrontation he hadn't asked for. A few passersby glanced nervously at the scene but quickly looked away, unwilling to get involved. Taking a deep breath, Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The simple act seemed to ignite the biker's fury. The one with the chain gestured mockingly toward the phone, his expression twisted with disdain. Oh, look at this guy, he said, throwing up his hands in exaggerated fear. Calling for backup? Who you gonna call, huh? Ghostbusters. The others roared with laughter, their voices filling the air, but Michael ignored them. His fingers moved steadily across the screen as he typed a message, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. His calmness was like oil on a fire, fueling their anger. The leader's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. You think that little phone is gonna save you? He snapped, his bravado cracking. Out here, you're on your own. Michael met his gaze, his expression unreadable but unwavering. We'll see about that, he said quietly, his words carrying a weight that silenced the laughter around him. The tension was electric, the kind that made the air feel heavier, every sound amplified. Michael remained calm, his composure unshaken, while the bikers grew more restless, their posturing more aggressive. It was clear they weren't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who refused to play into their intimidation. Then, with a sudden, deliberate motion, the biker with the chain kicked Michael's motorcycle. The bike tipped over with a metallic crash, the sound ringing out like a gunshot. A collective gasp rippled through the gas station as a small crowd began to gather at a safe distance, their phones raised to record the unfolding drama. Michael didn't react immediately. He bent down, picked up his bike, and inspected it for damage. His movements were calm, almost methodical, a stark contrast to the biker's escalating aggression. Without a word, He reached for his phone again, dialed a number, and spoke with quiet precision. "This is Michael Henderson," he said, his tone steady. "I need backup. Sending my location now." He ended the call and placed the phone back in his pocket, his expression giving nothing away. His calmness was unnerving, a silent confidence that seemed to chip away at the biker's bravado. The leader's smirk returned, but it was weaker now, forced. "Backup?" he mocked, though there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. "You really think someone's gonna come for you out here?" Michael didn't respond. He walked over to a nearby bench, sat down, and folded his arms, his silence more powerful than any words. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier arrogance wavering as the minutes stretched on. And then, faintly at first but growing louder with each passing second, the sound of sirens filled the air. The bikers froze, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, illuminating the darkening sky. But that wasn't all. Alongside the police cars came the unmistakable roar of motorcycles, powerful, commanding, and unrelenting. The bikers' eyes widened as 3 motorcycles pulled into the lot, their riders clad in leather jackets adorned with the emblem of the Steel Eagles, a name that carried both respect and fear in equal measure. Michael stood slowly, his movements deliberate, his gaze never leaving the bikers. The balance of power had shifted, and the tension in the air was palpable. As the police cars came to a stop and the Steel Eagles dismounted, the bikers realized too late that they had underestimated the man they had tried to humiliate. The stage was set, the players in place. What would happen next would be a lesson they would never forget. The roar of the approaching engines grew louder, their deep growl commanding attention as they rolled into the gas station lot. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like even the smallest sound could shatter it. The flashing lights from the police cars bathed the scene in sharp hues of red and blue, illuminating every face, every detail. The bikers who had once stood so arrogantly now looked like deer caught in headlights, their confidence slipping with every second. Michael remained calm, his face unreadable as he watched the unfolding scene. The Steel Eagles dismounted their bikes with precision, their presence radiating authority and a quiet kind of power. Their jackets bore the emblem of an eagle in flight, wings spread wide, a symbol that carried weight far beyond the leather it was stitched into. The leader of the group, a broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard, locked eyes with Michael and gave a nod of acknowledgement. "Sorry we're late," the man said, his voice deep and steady, carrying just enough edge to make anyone listening pay attention. "Traffic." Michael allowed the faintest smile to tug at the corner of his lips. "You're just in time," he replied, his tone neutral but laced with an unspoken understanding. The bikers who had been mocking Michael moments ago seemed frozen, their earlier swagger replaced by visible unease. They looked from the Steel Eagles to the police officers stepping out of their cars, their expressions a mix of confusion and rising panic. The leader of the hostile group, the man with the red bandana, forced a nervous laugh as he stepped forward, raising his hands slightly in a mock display of innocence. "Hey, look, this is all just a misunderstanding," he said, his voice faltering. "We didn't mean any harm, right, guys?" His attempt to rally his crew fell flat. The others remained silent, their eyes darting nervously between the arriving reinforcements and Michael, who stood quietly, unmoved by their sudden shift in demeanor. The officer in charge, a tall man with a commanding presence and a badge that gleamed under the station's fluorescent lights, stepped forward. His uniform was crisp, his expression unreadable but clearly serious. He looked first at Michael, offering a subtle nod of recognition, before turning his attention to the bikers. "Identification," the officer said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Hands where I can see them." "Now." The bikers scrambled to comply, their earlier bravado dissolving as they fumbled for their wallets. The man with the red bandana stammered, trying to explain himself as he handed over his ID. "Officer, like I said, it's just a misunderstanding. We weren't trying to cause any trouble." The officer didn't respond immediately. He studied the ID in his hand, then looked back at the group with a raised eyebrow. "A misunderstanding," he repeated, his voice heavy with skepticism. "Is that what you call harassment these days?" The murmurs from the small crowd of onlookers grew louder, the tension in the air mingling with a sense of quiet vindication. Phones were still raised, recording every moment, every detail. Michael stood slightly apart from the action, his arms crossed as he observed the scene with the same calm composure he'd maintained from the start. The leader of the Steel Eagles, still standing near his bike, spoke up then, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You don't seem to understand where you are or who you're dealing with," he said, his tone even but loaded with meaning. "This man you've been messing with, he's one of ours, and you've got a lot of explaining to do." Red Bandana's face drained of color as the weight of those words sank in. "Oh, one of yours," he stammered, his eyes widening as he looked back at Michael. "Wait, you're with them." Michael stepped forward, his movements deliberate but unhurried. He stopped just short of the man, his calm gaze meeting the panicked one in front of him. "That's right," he said quietly, his words carrying more power than any raised voice could. "I'm the regional president of the Steel Eagles, and you thought you could push me around." The revelation hit the hostile bikers like a hammer, their disbelief plain on their faces. They'd assumed Michael was alone, an easy target. Now they realized their mistake, and it was a big one. The leader of the Steel Eagles turned to the officer in charge. "These guys are more than just a public disturbance," he said. "From what I hear, they've been making trouble around here for a while." The officer nodded, his jaw tightening. "We've had reports," he confirmed, his gaze hardening as he looked back at the bikers. "Looks like it's time to address them." The bikers visibly shrank under the weight of the combined scrutiny from the police, the Steel Eagles, and the onlookers. Red Bandana tried one last time to salvage the situation, his voice shaky but still trying to sound tough. "Come on, man. Let's just call it even and move on. No harm, no foul." Michael tilted his head slightly, studying the man with a cool detachment that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Call it even," he repeated, his voice soft but unyielding. "You don't get to decide that. Not after what you tried to pull here." The officer stepped forward then, gesturing to his team. "Cuff them," he said simply. "We'll sort the rest out at the station." As the police moved in, the crowd of bystanders erupted into murmurs and quiet cheers. Phones captured every angle of the scene, ensuring that the events of the night would live on far beyond the confines of the gas station. The hostile bikers were led away one by one, their earlier confidence completely shattered. Michael turned back to the leader of the Steel Eagles, who was watching the scene unfold with a satisfied nod. "Thanks for showing up," Michael said, his tone genuine but understated. "I could have handled it, but it's good to know you've got my back." The older man clapped a hand on Michael's shoulder. "You know we always do," he said. "But you handled it just fine on your own." As the police cars and motorcycles began to disperse, the energy in the air shifted. The sense of danger that had hung over the gas station was replaced by a quiet hum of respect. The small crowd lingered, many still filming, but their focus had shifted from the confrontation to Michael himself. Before mounting his bike, Michael turned to the onlookers, his voice carrying a quiet strength that silenced the murmurs. "Next time you see someone in trouble, don't look away," he said. "Stand up. Do the right thing. You never know who might be watching, or what might come of it." With that, he climbed onto his motorcycle, started the engine, and rode off into the night, leaving behind a scene that would be talked about for weeks to come. As Michael rode away from the gas station, the cool night air rushing past him did little to cool the thoughts racing through his mind. He wasn't one to dwell on trouble, but this wasn't just about him. It was about something bigger, a deep-rooted problem that couldn't be ignored any longer. The faces of those bikers, the venom in their words, and the way they had tried to assert dominance in a place they had no rightful claim to. It was a reminder of the uphill battle he and so many others like him still faced. The road stretched ahead, illuminated only by the beam of his headlight and the faint glow of the city in the distance. His mind wandered back to the Steel Eagles. They were more than a club. They were a brotherhood, a symbol of unity and respect. But even with their reputation, incidents like tonight weren't uncommon. He'd always believed in handling things with dignity, using strength only when necessary. But tonight's encounter left a bitter taste in his mouth. As he turned onto a quieter street leading toward his neighborhood, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled over to the side, switched off the engine, and fished out his phone. It was a message from Marcus, one of the Steel Eagles' senior members. "Call me when you're home. There's more to this group than what you saw tonight." Michael frowned, a sense of unease settling over him. He tapped a quick response, "On my way, we'll call soon," and slid the phone back into his pocket. He wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but Marcus's message hinted at something deeper. If there was more to this, he needed to know. When Michael finally pulled into his driveway, the house was dark, save for the faint light from the porch. He parked his motorcycle in the garage, double-checked the lock, and stepped inside. The silence of his home was a stark contrast to the chaos of the gas station. After grabbing a glass of water, he sank onto the couch and dialed Marcus's number. "Michael." Marcus answered on the first ring, his voice low but urgent. "Glad you called. You all right?" "I'm fine," Michael replied, leaning back against the cushions. "But your message has me wondering. What's going on?" Marcus hesitated for a moment before speaking. "The guys you dealt with tonight. They're not just some random group of troublemakers. They're part of a larger network that's been causing issues all over the state. Harassment, intimidation, even extortion in some areas. We've been hearing whispers about them trying to expand their territory, and it looks like they've started targeting smaller towns." Michael's grip on the phone tightened. "You think tonight was more than just a coincidence?" "I do," Marcus said firmly. "Word travels fast, especially in our circles. They probably knew who you were, or at least suspected it. This might have been their way of sending a message, testing how far they could push before someone pushed back." Michael exhaled slowly, processing the weight of Marcus's words. If this group was organized and deliberate in their actions, tonight's encounter could be the beginning of something much larger. "What's the plan?" he asked finally. "We're looking into it," Marcus assured him. "We've got contacts keeping tabs on their movements, but it's going to take time to piece everything together. For now, just keep your eyes open and stay careful." Michael thanked Marcus and ended the call, but the unease lingered. He knew this was far from over. If this group was as dangerous as Marcus suggested, they wouldn't take tonight's events lying down. They'd come back, stronger and more prepared. And when they did, he needed to be ready. The following days passed with an undercurrent of tension. Michael went about his usual routine at the garage, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The sense of normalcy felt fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. One afternoon, as he finished up a repair job, a familiar figure stepped into the garage. It was Lisa, a reporter who had covered community stories in the area for years. She was sharp, persistent, and had a knack for uncovering truths others wanted to keep hidden. "Michael," she greeted, her voice warm but laced with curiosity. "I heard about what happened at the gas station. Mind if I ask a few questions?" Michael wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the workbench. "Depends on the questions," he said with a small smile. Lisa didn't waste time. "The footage from that night is making rounds online, and people are talking. But it's not just about what happened, it's about you. Who you are, what you stand for. People are saying you're part of the Steel Eagles, that you stood your ground against those guys without even flinching. Is that true?" Michael's smile faded slightly. "I'm not looking for attention," he said carefully. "I just did what anyone should do, stood up for what's right." Lisa studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe," she said. "But not everyone would have handled it the way you did. There's something about this story that feels bigger than what we see on the surface. I want to dig deeper, find out who those bikers were and what their real motives might have been. If there's more to this, people need to know." Michael hesitated. He admired Lisa's determination, but bringing more attention to the situation could also escalate it. After a moment, he said, "Be careful, Lisa. These aren't just local troublemakers. They're part of something bigger, and they won't take kindly to people digging into their business." Lisa's eyes gleamed with determination. "Good to know," she said. "I'll tread carefully, but I won't back down." As she left, Michael couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and concern. Lisa was walking into dangerous territory, and he knew firsthand how high the stakes could get. That night, As he sat on his porch watching the stars, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. He hesitated before answering, his instincts already on high alert. Michael Henderson. A voice on the other end said, low and gravelly. You got guts, I'll give you that, but you don't know who you're dealing with. Michael's jaw tightened. And who exactly am I dealing with? He asked evenly. You'll find out soon enough, the voice replied. Consider tonight's call a warning. Stay out of our way, or you'll regret it. The line went dead, leaving Michael staring into the darkness, his resolve hardening. Whatever was coming, he wouldn't back down. He couldn't. The night felt heavier than usual, with a chill in the air that seemed to seep into Michael's bones. The words from the phone call earlier echoed in his mind, their warning clear yet cloaked in enough ambiguity to leave him guessing. This wasn't the first time he'd been threatened, but something about this felt different. These men weren't bluffing. They had a plan, and Michael knew it was only a matter of time before they made their next move. The Steel Eagles were already on high alert. Marcus had sent a message to the group, urging everyone to stay vigilant and keep communication lines open. Michael appreciated the support, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was personal. He wasn't just a target because of his affiliation with the Steel Eagles. This group was testing him, trying to see how far they could push before he broke. 2 days after the threatening call, Michael was closing up the garage when he noticed something unusual. A black SUV, windows tinted, was parked across the street, its engine idling. It hadn't been there when he'd started locking up, and the longer it sat there, the more it set his instincts on edge. He finished securing the door and casually walked to his motorcycle, pretending not to notice the vehicle. As he swung his leg over the bike and started the engine, the SUV's headlights flicked on. It began moving, slowly trailing him as he pulled out onto the road. Michael kept his movements steady, his heart beating faster with every passing moment. He wasn't about to lead them to his home, so he took a detour, weaving through quieter streets and back roads. The SUV stayed behind him, keeping a careful distance. Michael's mind raced. Were they trying to intimidate him, or was this something more? He decided to test their resolve, suddenly taking a sharp turn onto a side road that led to an empty industrial area. The SUV followed, its presence now undeniable. Michael slowed his bike to a stop, pulling into the lot of an abandoned warehouse. He cut the engine and waited, his hands steady despite the tension coiling in his chest. The SUV stopped a few yards away. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the night pressing in around them. Then the driver's side door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, his face obscured by the shadow of his hood. 2 more figures emerged from the SUV, their movements deliberate and menacing. Looks like you've been busy, the first man said, his voice carrying easily across the still night. Thought we'd stop by to remind you of your place. Michael didn't move. He'd faced men like this before, men who thought strength came from numbers and intimidation. But he knew better. Strength wasn't about how loud you were or how many people you had backing you up. It was about resolve, about standing firm even when the odds weren't in your favor. I don't need reminders, Michael said evenly, his voice cutting through the darkness. But it seems like you do. The man chuckled. A low, humorless sound. Brave words, he said. Let's see if they hold up. The 3 men began to close the distance, their footsteps crunching against the gravel. Michael stayed rooted, his gaze steady, his mind calculating. He wasn't unarmed, but he also knew that any move he made would escalate the situation. He needed to buy time, to figure out their intentions before things spiraled out of control. Just as the tension reached its peak, the distant sound of motorcycle engines roared to life. The 3 men froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. Michael allowed himself a small smile. He hadn't come here alone. The Steel Eagles had been on standby since Marcus's warning, and Michael had sent them a quick message as soon as he'd noticed the SUV. Now, one by one, the Eagles rode into the lot, their headlights cutting through the darkness. There were 6 of them, each one exuding a quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. The 3 men from the SUV exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado faltering. The first man turned back to Michael, his expression hardening. This isn't over, he said. his voice tight with frustration. Michael tilted his head slightly, his calm demeanor unshaken. "It never is," he replied. The men retreated to their SUV, their departure marked by the screech of tires as they sped off into the night. The Steel Eagles stayed for a moment, their presence a silent reassurance that Michael wasn't alone in this fight. Marcus pulled up next to him, his helmet off. Concern etched across his face. "You all right?" he asked. Michael nodded, his gaze fixed on the direction the SUV had gone. "They're testing us," he said, "and they're not going to stop." Marcus sighed, his jaw tightening. "Then we make sure they know exactly who they're dealing with." The group dispersed after ensuring Michael was safe, but the encounter left him more determined than ever. This wasn't just about defending himself or the Steel Eagles. It was about sending a message to the bikers, to the community, and to anyone else who thought they could use fear and intimidation to claim power. As he rode home that night, the city lights stretching out before him, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight wasn't over, but he was ready for whatever came next. The following day, Michael woke up earlier than usual, the events of the previous night replaying in his mind. He couldn't shake the unease that lingered like a shadow stretching far longer than it should. The men in the SUV weren't amateurs. They'd been methodical, almost too deliberate in their approach. It felt less like a random act of intimidation and more like the beginning of something much larger. At the garage, Michael went about his work, trying to focus on the cars in front of him rather than the storm brewing in the background. Customers came and went, their faces filled with the kind of trust Michael had worked years to earn. For a while, things felt normal, almost peaceful. A delivery truck pulled into the lot, was shattered, its size and unfamiliar logo immediately catching Michael's attention. He hadn't ordered any parts, and the delivery schedule for the garage was set weeks in advance. The driver, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, hopped out and handed Michael a clipboard. "Got a package for you," the man said, his tone casual but his eyes unreadable. Michael hesitated before signing. "Who's it from?" he asked, scanning the form for a name or company. The driver shrugged. "Didn't say. Just told me to bring it here." As soon as the truck drove off, Michael opened the package in the privacy of his office. Inside was a single object, a plain black envelope. He opened it carefully, his pulse quickening. The note inside was short, written in jagged, rushed handwriting. Asterisk, asterisk. "You think you're untouchable, but everyone has their limits. Walk away while you still can." Asterisk, asterisk. Michael stared at the words, their meaning clear and chilling. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. It was a direct threat. And whoever had sent it wasn't afraid to make it personal. He clenched his fists, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Walking away wasn't an option. Not now, not ever. He folded the note and tucked it into his pocket, his mind already racing with questions. Who was behind this? Was it the same group from the gas station? Or was this a separate player, taking advantage of the chaos to make their move? Michael didn't have answers, but he knew where to start looking. That evening, he called a meeting with the Steel Eagles. They gathered at the clubhouse, a converted warehouse that served as both their headquarters and a sanctuary. The room buzzed with energy as Michael laid out the events of the past 24 hours, from the SUV encounter to the anonymous threat. "This isn't random," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Someone's orchestrating this. They want to scare us, make us back down. But we're not going anywhere." Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "It's bigger than the bikers at the gas station," he said. "They were sloppy, too loud. Whoever sent that note, they're calculated. They know what they're doing." One of the younger members, a wiry man named Jamal, leaned forward. "What if it's connected to the new gang that's been trying to push into our area? Word is they've been testing boundaries, seeing how far they can go before someone pushes back." Michael considered this. The timing fit, and it would explain the sudden escalation. But it still didn't answer the bigger question: why target him specifically? Before they could discuss further, Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his brows furrowing. "You're not gonna like this," he said, passing the phone to Michael. It was a news article, freshly uploaded. The headline read, Steel Eagles allegedly involved in local vandalism incident. The article detailed a series of property damages around town, including spray-painted walls and broken windows, all attributed to the Steel Eagles. Photos accompanied the piece, showing their emblem crudely painted at each scene. Michael's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a smear campaign. It was a calculated move to turn public opinion against them. He looked around the room, the faces of his brothers and sisters reflecting the same mix of anger and disbelief he felt. "This is a setup," he said. "Someone's trying to frame us." The room erupted in conversation, theories flying as they tried to piece together who could be behind it. But before they could reach any conclusions, Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message. "Unknown number," Marcus said, reading the message aloud. ***, you can't protect everyone. Choose wisely. ***. The silence that followed was deafening. The threat was clear. Whoever was behind this wasn't just targeting Michael. They were willing to go after anyone close to him. Michael's mind raced. His friends, his family, even his customers, they were all potential targets. He had to act fast, but every move he made felt like stepping into a trap. As the night wore on, Michael and the Steel Eagles devised a plan. They would gather intel, trace the source of the threats, and prepare for whatever came next. But deep down, Michael knew this wasn't just about strategy. It was about resilience, about standing firm even when the ground beneath you felt like it was crumbling. By the time the meeting ended, the air was thick with tension. Michael stepped outside, the cool night air a welcome reprieve from the wait inside the clubhouse. He looked up at the stars, their quiet brilliance a stark contrast to the chaos below. This fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but Michael was ready. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on, no matter the cost. The next day arrived with a quiet tension hanging in the air, the kind that signals the beginning of a storm. Michael had barely slept, his mind turning over every detail of the threats, the smear campaign, and the escalating situation. He knew it was time to take action, not just for himself, but for everyone connected to him. The Steel Eagles were ready, prepared to stand beside their president no matter what came their way. But Michael's gut told him this fight would require more than just strength. It needed precision and calm in the face of chaos. By midday, Michael's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from the same unknown number that had sent the ominous warning the night before. This time, the message was direct. ***, meet us tonight. The old factory on West Harbor. Come alone if you want this to end. ***, Michael stared at the message, his thoughts racing. It was a trap, it had to be, but he also knew that this was his best chance to bring this to a close. As he gathered his things, Marcus intercepted him. "You're not going alone," Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I have to," Michael replied. "If they think I'm bringing backup, they'll bolt, or worse, retaliate against someone innocent." Marcus frowned but finally nodded. "At least let us follow from a distance. We'll stay out of sight, but if things go south, we'll be there." That evening, Michael rode to the abandoned factory. The setting sun cast long shadows across the crumbling structure, the air heavy with the smell of rust and decay. He parked his bike just outside and walked in, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. The interior was dimly lit, the faint glow of hanging bulbs barely cutting through the darkness. 3 figures stepped out of the shadows. Michael immediately recognized the man in the center. It was Red Bandana, his face twisted into a smug grin. To his left stood the stocky biker who had swung the chain at the gas station. The third figure, however, was unexpected. It was the driver of the SUV from the other night, the one who had threatened him in the alley. "So you decided to show?" Red Bandana sneered. "That's brave, or stupid. Haven't decided yet." Michael didn't flinch. "Let's cut to the chase. What do you want?" The SUV driver stepped forward, his expression cold and calculating. "What we want is simple. You and your club stay out of our way. No more interference, no more standing up for people who don't deserve it. You do that, and this ends. But if you keep playing hero, we'll make sure there's nothing left for you to fight for." Michael's jaw tightened. And if I say no? The man smirked. Then we'll make an example out of you, starting tonight. Before Michael could respond, a faint sound caught his attention, the unmistakable hum of motorcycles approaching. It grew louder and louder until it filled the factory like a rolling thunderstorm. Michael's lips curved into a subtle smile. You didn't really think I'd come alone, did you? The Steel Eagles poured into the factory, their presence filling the space with an undeniable energy. Red Bandana's confidence wavered, his eyes darting between the club members and his own sparse backup. The SUV driver, however, didn't seem fazed. You think this changes anything? He growled. We've got more where this came from. Michael stepped forward, his voice steady. You've underestimated us from the start. You thought you could bully and intimidate, but all you've done is unite us. Now it's your move. For a moment, the air was thick with tension, everyone waiting for the first sign of action. But before either side could make a move, the sound of police sirens broke through the air. Flashing blue and red lights lit up the factory as officers swarmed the building. Everyone, hands in the air, a commanding voice shouted. The SUV driver froze, his bravado finally cracking. What is this? He demanded, his voice rising in panic. Michael turned to him, his expression calm but firm. You thought I was just some guy at a gas station. What you didn't know is that I've been working with the police for weeks, gathering evidence on every illegal operation you've been running. Your threats, your vandalism, your attempts to frame my club. It's all documented. And now, it's over. The officers moved swiftly, placing the SUV driver and his accomplices in handcuffs. Red Bandana tried to resist but was quickly subdued. As they were led away, the driver glared at Michael. This isn't the end, he spat. Michael met his gaze, unflinching. No, it's just the beginning. For justice. As the chaos settled, Marcus walked over, a satisfied grin on his face. You really had us worried there for a minute, he said. Michael chuckled. Had to keep you on your toes. The Steel Eagles left the factory as a united front, their resolve stronger than ever. For Michael, the night wasn't just about defeating an enemy. It was a reminder of the strength found in solidarity and standing up for what's right. As they rode into the night, the air felt lighter, the future a little brighter. But Michael knew the fight for justice was far from over, and he was ready for whatever came next.